Hi, Eliza.
Hi, Candice.
Thank you for coming on to COLLAF Conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You have one of the coolest jobs of anyone I know.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the art world?
I manage a private collection belonging to a single owner, and I got into the art world through auction houses, and I ended up with a private client who has a collection of their own, and I am now their art collections manager.
Amazing. So how did you get from A to B, starting at Sotheby's?
Yep.
Kind of as a junior, I assume?
Yes, very junior.
To now managing, a major collection in the art world. How did you get there?
So I always loved working with the clients. I found that the most rewarding. I loved it when a client would email me back and send it to the whole department, but would address it to Eliza, or would call up the department phone line and ask to speak to Eliza because I'd given them good customer service the time before. And I spoke to someone that was more senior than me in the private client department, and I said, how do I do what you do? And she gave me the best advice I have ever received, which was to become an EA for a chairman. So I moved back to London and I was EA to a chairman for a different auction house. And I got to practice with all of their private clients. And then when that came to an end, I applied for another executive assistant position for a different chairman at a different auction house. And I thought I was going to be a shoo-in. They were saying all the right things at the interview, and I ultimately didn't get offered the role. And I was completely devastated. And about 2 weeks later, they gave me a call up and they said, look, our favorite client is needing a collections manager and we've put you forward for it. So nearly 3 years later, here I am managing a private art collection.
Amazing. We're going to get onto the private art collection. I first want to ask you a little bit about kind of your time in the art world, almost prior to managing the collection.
Mm-hmm. So
firstly, was there anything that really shocked you when you first started that people might not know about the art world?
There's so much about the art world that is shocking on all levels. I think there is a complete lack of transparency in regards to pay, and it's getting touched on more and more. But the art world is often viewed as this very snooty industry that people don't really know much about. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes down to the pay within the art world. Sadly, it is a very low paying career, which means a lot of people really low down in the industry need to be supported by familial wealth who are able to support them through the low-paying, hard-working hours as a junior. And then also the juxtaposition of how much money there is in the art world, where you go to auctions and you only clap after a lot when it reaches the millions. And millions of pounds are being thrown around, and it's such an exciting, exhilarating time in an auction or at an art fair or in a gallery. And there's such big disparities within it. I think that was definitely one of the hardest things to come to terms with.
Do you think it's getting better?
I think it is getting better. And I think it's getting better because there's more transparency. There are amazing websites like Glassdoor where people post their salaries, and so people know what they're getting themselves into. There's Sophie McPherson, one of the biggest art world recruiters, has started a annual salary review which covers the art world salaries in New York and London, which has been really phenomenal. And most importantly, women talking to women about their salaries, because not just in the art world, but women are severely underpaid in most industries compared to men. And so it's so important that women talk to each other about salaries and about finances so that they can support one another.
Most of the major artists, contemporary artists at the moment, are men. And there are only a few that are women. Do you think that is a gender issue, or it's kind of coincidental and actually the art world hasn't got such a big gender issue?
I think it's definitely a gendered issue. And what's really interesting is that art is what one could call a gendered subject from the age of 4. That when you are in primary school, it's all the girls that love the art class. And my GCSE art class was predominantly girls, and my A-level art class was predominantly girls, and my art history A-level was predominantly girls. My art history university degree was predominantly girls. And yet, as you say, at the senior levels in the careers, whether you're an artist or in a gallery or in an auction house, it's dominated by males. So I don't know where this overlap happens, at what stage in a career that jump happens. And I don't know whether it's this inability to offer high performing roles to women when they're in their fertile stage of life, that this overlap, this overtaking happens, because it's something that's so predominantly female in the best way possible for the majority of one's life, and then up at the top is all run by male.
So how much of your job is split into actually managing the collection versus acquiring new pieces?
So I'm really lucky that my employer, the collection that I work for, know what they want, because advising is a whole nother job. But I do have so much joy in flicking through the auction catalogues, dog-earing a page.
They're yours.
That
I'll
obviously, but also dog-earing a page, leaving it for my employer to look at, and then agreeing that is something they want and that they do then purchase it. I've had a particularly fun time recently because my employer has moved house and has brought with them a lot of furniture and art that they already own. But there's lots of blank walls and there's blank corners where we need to put a piece of furniture. And I've managed to find little things to go into those corners. And when they finally arrive and the employer loves them, it's really rewarding knowing that I found it. And also, my employer has certain collections where there's one thing that they really hone in on and they really focus on. So it's really easy to, go onto the little tiny auction houses in France and type in the artist's name or that style or that period and come up with the little gems that, if it was at an auction house in New York or London, would have been sold for 10 times the price. And we managed to get it on a great deal. It might need to get a little bit of restoration done in Paris. We ship it to London and everyone's happy.
What is the key criteria when you're looking at acquiring a new piece?
That you want it. You want it on your walls, you want it in your home, and you're not relying on the market for it to perform well, because sadly a lot of times trends change, markets dip, and you don't want to be kicking yourself over something that didn't perform well. You want to be
to actually love it.
You want to be looking at your belongings, loving that you have it in that room.
What are the different ways in which you've dealt with in terms of preserving artworks?
I think my biggest takeaway, because I work for such an eclectic collection, is having your specialist that you can go to for every single piece. That if I've got a question about a piece of English mahogany furniture, I know who to go to. If I've got a piece about
so specific.
If I got a question about a chandelier, I know who to go to. But that chandelier person is going to be different than the nice man that does all of our mid-century modern antique lamps, who's going to be different to the electric specialist in the house. And then, we've got someone that specializes in gilt bronze, but we've also got someone that specializes in gilt wood. And so it's having those connections and relying on really, really good recommendations and word of mouth, that you make sure you know who you can turn to, because you can't know everything and you can't be a jack of all trades in this industry. You have to know your experts in each field.
But in terms of preservation of the actual works, what other methods have you heard of?
There's so many. So if you have a dark piece of wood furniture, you got to make sure your curtains are always closed. If you're not in the room, got to stop them from bleaching in the sun. Similarly with bleaching in the sun, works on paper, put those in a dark corridor, put those in a downstairs loo, put your oil paintings where they're going to be in a sunny spot, because they're not going to get bleached by the sun. You're going to maintain the pigment, maintain the picture. And then
Where do you learn this?
I honestly, just in the role, different people have said, why is this like this? You should do this. And some people tell me, oh, that's so good that you do this. And I said, oh, I didn't mean to. And it's been a lucky surprise that I was doing the right thing.
Okay, amazing.
And then in terms of preservation, there's lots of methods. If you've got a storage facility, you might not want sprinklers, because sprinklers might ruin your artwork. So you can get these oxygen sucking rooms where they will suck the oxygen out of a room if there's a fire, so that you can stop a fire, save all your artworks. And
maybe not yourself.
Maybe not yourself. They often have escape routes for people. But there's so much, and as I mentioned, so much of it is just relying on experts in the field giving you little handy hints.
I was speaking to someone who has, I think it's a warehouse in Venice, where I may have told you this, where they essentially have a system in case of flooding, where the works are attached, and if there is a flood, the works are risen up.
It's amazing.
So that they don't get affected.
That's amazing.
Which is crazy.
That's so
like
cool.
When you think about the investment that's put into simply the warehouse and the preserving of these works, is mad. It's like almost the cost of the works.
Yeah, and I know it's been a big thing with the fires in LA recently.
Of course.
Is that their electricity was down in Los Angeles, and so it's then, does your warehouse that lifts up your artwork from a flood, does it have a backup generator? Is it going to work if the flooding's so bad that there's no electricity? What about your security cameras, your security codes, everything? And there's so much that you don't think of when you're just thinking, I just got to make a storage facility for my art, or I want to keep my art safe in my house. Los Angeles is an earthquake zone, so if you bolt things to the wall, it can't get removed easily if you're wanting to run away with it in the middle of a fire.
I'm sure you've had some pretty crazy experiences in your job. Are there any that are like absolutely hilarious that you want to share?
Yes. This was when I was working as an executive assistant, and we were trying to win a pitch, and we were trying to convince a client that they should consign with us rather than consigning with one of our competitor auction houses. And part of the deal was that we would have the artwork professionally photographed in New York. I was in London, and I managed to find a fine art photography company. I had the address, and I had the piece of art, and I had the phone number for the housekeeper that was going to let the photographers into the apartment.
Okay.
And it was a blue chip piece of contemporary art. And the photographers got to the apartment, they rang the doorbell, the housekeeper buzzed them in, and they miscounted when they were climbing the floors, and they stopped on the wrong floor, and they knocked on a door which they thought was the correct apartment. A housekeeper opened the door, they held up their cameras, and they said, we're here to photograph the art. And this housekeeper blindly led them to the principal's bedroom, where there was an unmade bed, and above the bed was a blue chip, high value impressionist painting. And the photographers said, I really think we were here to photograph a contemporary piece of art, and that it was in a living room. I don't think we're in the right apartment. So they retraced their steps, realized they were on the wrong floor, but this woman had let them into the apartment to photograph a blue chip piece of work above the principal's bed.
Oh my God.
And had no instruction from the principal that these people were coming to the apartment. And luckily, these were some very honest guys who had seen a lot of high value work in their life and said, we're just not in the right apartment. And they left, and they gave me a call, and they said, can't tell you what we saw, but we saw something pretty cool, and we have some pretty cool stories.
That's insane. Did your family have any interest in art growing up? Were you surrounded by it a lot?
So I'm the first person in my family that's forged a career in the art world. My dad has a corporate job. My siblings have corporate jobs. But I grew up with two godparents who were both artists. My godfather is a designer, and my godmother is a ceramicist. And when they would come and visit me, we did a lot of art and painting classes and drawing classes. I also grew up in a household that did a lot of arts and crafts for fun. We did a lot of paint by numbers. We did a lot of paper mache. But most importantly, I grew up in a house that had art on the walls. My parents weren't collectors, but we had paintings on the walls, prints on the walls. We had little sculptures in bookshelves. And I think as an adult, I've realized how much of an influence that would have had on my upbringing and my outlook and my visual understanding of the world, which a lot of people don't grow up with that exposure. And it's something that I never considered, or at least I took for granted. And in hindsight, I love it. I love going home and knowing that the TV room is the room that's got some pictures of a inconspicuous hayfield in it.
No, you know what? I so agree. It's a conversation I have a lot with my family where we ask like what the importance is of having art in a home. And not only do I think it brings culture into a home automatically, and you just, once you're surrounded by it, you do go up and you do have a bit of an understanding about art and culture from it. But on top of that, I think, as you said, it creates those memories and they make you feel at home.
And it's so interesting because I know that your family has moved house, and I'm doing it with my boss at the moment because they're moving house, and my parents moved house about 7 years ago. But when you put a piece of art into a different room and you give it new life. So we grew up with this painting of a river, and it's pretty abstract, and it was in my brother's room, which was a boys' room, and it was accompanied by a museum poster of a Roy Lichtenstein of an airplane. And it's now
bought at the Tate when
exactly, and it is now center stage above our mantelpiece in our family kitchen, and it's so cool giving it a new life.
It really is.
We grew up with a really big painting by a Scottish artist of this submarine, and it was in our formal living room, and it was, you know, big and grand, and now it sits above our kitchen counter, and it's so lovely because we see it every day, and it's the backdrop of our family conversations when we're around the kitchen table, and it just gives a whole new meaning to it. It's no longer this big grand thing, but instead it's this silly submarine.
No, I so agree. It's funny because not to self-promote, but with COLLAF, when I've been speaking to a lot of collectors about it, one of the things they love the most about it when they first hear about the project and the concept is, oh my God, I can play around with my art.
Yeah.
And, like, do something with it. Because after a while, when art does sit on a wall, you know, it's obviously a static object most of the time. And it's beautiful to look at and you enjoy it, but it's quite fun to be able to play with it. And they all get so excited by the idea of like, oh, I can actually pick and choose and kind of create a new room, even if it's only for 5 days.
Yeah.
But it's just a chance, I suppose, to do that and have that fun with it.
And I think especially for your collectors, it's going to be an opportunity for them to test the waters.
Yeah,
do they like those two paintings next to each other? Because maybe when they go home, they want to hang them that way.
Absolutely. And I was having a conversation with another collector who said they had done a show of their works, kind of a private show with a gallery. It was only from their collection. And the gallerists had chosen the works that were going to be on show and how they were going to be on show. And the collector had no autonomy over that. And she said that when they went to the show to see it themselves, they actually didn't like how it was put together because they weren't so pleased, you know, this piece being next to this piece, and they would have done it differently. And it's just interesting how, you know, you buy art in a singular nature, it's a very individual thing, but actually when you put it next to something else, it can completely change your perspective on it.
Yeah. It's also definitely interesting, like as you were saying, that it was probably curated by someone who probably actually had loads of deep thoughts and, you know, research about why they wanted them next to each other. But having this blank canvas, white cube gallery where the research and the art speaks for itself, it's really different than when it's in your home and you've got to tie it together and you've got to tie it into your everyday life and how you want things. And so it's all well and good looking at a piece of museum saying, this is so thought-provoking, or in a gallery, this is so thought-provoking and it looks so great on this blank white wall. But is it going to look good with your messy trainers underneath? And is it going to look good above your sofa where your children are lounging and watching TV? And as a collector, that's what you have to think about, because it has to fit in with your life.
I spoke to another collector as well when you think something's going to work and it doesn't. So they had 2 crystal vines, one of a queen and one of Kate Moss, butt naked. Well, butt naked, her breasts are on show.
Yeah.
And the queen is obviously looking very poised and put together. And they thought it would look great for the 2 of them to be next to each other.
Juxtaposed.
And they tried it and it was terrible. It was just far too much. The light was too much. It just didn't work. So obviously he has light works and lighting stations. And it just didn't work at all.
Yeah.
And they separated them and they're very happy. I think if you're not that avid of an art collector, or you're not such a curator, and you just buy pieces because you like them, you might not think about, actually, does it matter where they sit on the wall? But it really does, and it's not just looking for blank space. It's actually, does this work in the room, fitting with everything else in it?
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned from my current role, which I didn't have any experience with prior, was furniture. So one of the collections I manage is the collection of furniture, and there's a big variety. There's the contemporary custom made bespoke furniture, which is very everyday, what we're pretty much used to seeing. And then there's the mid-century modern, a bit more chic. You see it in the influencers' homes and the models' homes. And then you go back and there's the Louis furniture, the Empire furniture, the Swedish furniture, the Old English furniture. And I've had to learn all of these terms and try and recognize furniture as, oh, well, that's English, so you should put it in that room with your other English furniture, because actually it's going to butt heads with your Russian furniture. But it goes hand in hand with the artwork, because if you're collecting a British artist, you might want to pair it with your English furniture. Or maybe you've got some artwork that's in a really glitzy gilt frame, so you're going to want to pair it with your Louis furniture, or with maybe your Empire furniture, which has hints of gilt bronze, etc. And it ends up, if you're into collecting, you somehow end up being into interior design.
They work hand in hand.
Yeah,
they really do.
I think when you're into collecting, you end up becoming a collector of collections. So you'll have your art collection, but you might also have that little niche thing you collect as well. And it might not be furniture, it might be stamps or coins.
Have you ever been to the Gulbenkian Museum?
I have not. Where is that?
So it's in Portugal.
Okay.
In Lisbon. And it's a big collector. He was a huge philanthropist. And he essentially then gave his collection to the state and made a whole museum out of it. And it's incredible because it basically shows you the little obsessions that he had throughout his life, whether it was Chinese furniture, then Chinese art. He then became obsessed with Lalique and their glass. Yeah. He became, obsessed with Impressionist art. Everything he has, jewelry, all of it. And it's all in these little areas, and you walk around and you really feel like you're walking through his mind. Yeah. And like, oh, this is kind of his journey of what he was interested in at this period. Yeah. And it's just like, it really is a way of keeping someone alive in a different way, like leaving a legacy of like, these were actually my interests in life. Yeah. And I know that it's come up recently in the press because of her movie, The Substance, but Demi Moore collects miniature furniture, and she has miniature chairs on her wall above her kitchen table, like doll's house chairs. And it's just completely fascinating because it's also really interesting seeing what people put on their walls that aren't just a painting or a photo, and how you can decorate a space or elevate a space with things other than your fine art or what you would consider art. But that, for Demi Moore, is her collection. That is her collection of little chairs. Yeah, I mean, you can collect whatever you want. And then display it however you want. If you were to collect something, what would your collection be? Ooh. I mean, the easy thing to say is art. I'm trying to be more exciting than that, though. What would I collect? Vintage shoes. Vintage shoes. I think I'd collect blankets. Blankets? Yeah, like blankets, different ones, different seasons, different rooms. Are you wanting it over your lap outdoors while you read a book? Are you wanting it to snuggle under when you watch TV? We've got quite a collection at home already, and I whip out a different one depending on my mood. Okay, one last question for you. If you weren't in the art world, where would you be, do you think? When I was little, I really wanted to be an orthodontist. That was really surprising. I wasn't expecting that from you at all.
I know, and I realise I'm not very good at maths or
Not
science.
expecting that.
No.
Well, thank you so much, Eliza. This has been a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
And looking forward to catching up soon.
Can't wait.